I am Tim Watson Jr., and my law firm is the law offices of Watson and Watson. I practice with my father, Tim Watson Sr., and my brother, Todd Watson. So it should really be the law offices of Watson, Watson, and Watson, but we were two of us for a long time before my brother came back and practiced with us. Our original office, which has been the office for our firm since 1969, is in Newport, Arkansas. I am now running the office in Fayetteville, Arkansas, over in Northwest Arkansas. And I have been in Northwest Arkansas for about 4 or 5 years now. I have been practicing law since 2011. So coming up on 10 years. Since I started, I have always done a lot of domestic relations, family law, as it's colloquially known, divorce, custody, adoption, guardianship, a lot of that kind of stuff. I also do a lot of criminal law. In the last few years, I have moved more and more towards business disputes, civil litigation, people in lawsuits about contracts, specifically with regard to construction contracts, people in disputes with banks over loans, really any kind of an agreement, oral or written, that leads to some kind of a dispute. I have started more and more to specialize in that field of practice. Do a little bit of probate work, mainly anything that puts me in a courtroom. I don't do bankruptcy. I don't do a lot of transactional stuff. I am primarily a litigator. Well, it's a really good question. I didn't want to be an attorney for a long time. My dad was an attorney, and I had people telling me from the time I was very young, oh, you should be an attorney. And I didn't want to be. I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to be a doctor. There were a lot of different things that I wanted to be. I explored a lot. I traveled and worked in a lot of different places after college and really did not settle down into the decision to become a lawyer until I was about 27 years old, which is when I went to law school. And I think probably the key that made me think that maybe I would want to be a lawyer. One summer when I was between living in different places, I had moved back to Newport and was working for my father for the summer. And I think I was probably 24, might have been 25. And I helped him do a lot of research and develop a lot of his cases. And one of those cases was about an old farmer who lived on a very small plot of land that his family had lived on for a long time. And the land all around him had been bought up by a large farm, as is happening all over the United States and in Arkansas, which is primarily a farming state. It is really hard to farm and make a living as a small farmer because farming is so expensive. So this small farmer had a figure 8 shaped plot of land, and his house was on the bottom part of the 8. And in order to get to the field on the top part of the 8, he had to drive his farm equipment just in a teeny spot across some land that was owned by this big landowner. Big landowner put a farm implement on that road to prevent him from getting from the bottom part of the 8 to the top part of the 8. And so our client was going to have to drive way down to the highway and all the way to the west and north and east and then back down to get to that plot of land. And it was going to increase the cost of diesel in his equipment to the point that he was going to go out of business. And the big landowner knew that. And the big landowner was trying to drive him out of business so that he would have to sell his farmland. Long story short, which I know it's too late for that, I figured out through research how to have that road turned into an easement so that he had the right to drive on it and the large landowner couldn't stop him. And ultimately we saved this guy's farm, and he passed away years later, but was able to pass that land on to his son. And that experience made me realize that the law is essentially a tool to help and protect. And interestingly, the large landowner has used our firm for all of their business since then because they were so impressed with the work we did. So we got a lot of good out of that. But that was probably the experience that made me think that I would want to be a lawyer. I think that, so in a real basic sense, what an attorney does is learn the facts and apply the law to those facts. And it can get much more complicated than that, but that is foundational what an attorney does. And in order to do that effectively, the attorney has to understand who their client is. And finding out who your client is requires a lot of listening and communication and time. And I have heard, and I believe that the number one complaint that clients have about their attorney is that it is hard to communicate with them, which ironically makes the attorney's job harder and makes it less likely that the attorney is going to succeed. And attorneys that don't succeed in the cases that they have and clients that they represent end up losing clients and not getting more cases. So I believe that the most important thing that an attorney can do is communicate with the client. I believe I'm pretty good at that. I spend a lot of time with my clients trying to really understand where they're coming from and what is going on in their life that has led them to this dispute, and then try to help organize the facts that exist in their case in this microcosm of their life so that we can get the result from the law that they are aiming for. I think that's the whole point. Well, I think I'm a good communicator. Like I said, for a long time, I wanted to be an actor, and now I'm in the courtroom. So essentially I am. This is a lot of performance. That doesn't mean it's insincere. This is a lot more rewarding, I think, than being on TV or being on the stage, but it is performance. I have to understand the facts. I have to understand the law. I have to essentially rehearse what it is I'm going to be saying to a judge or to a jury or to both, and then be prepared enough when it comes time to go into court to make a good presentation so that the people that are listening to me talk understand who my client is, understand where my client's coming from, and understand how the law should be applied. So again, communication is key. I think that it also helps have kind of a passion for writing and research. A lot of what an attorney does, most of what an attorney does, is outside the courtroom, even if you're in litigation. And it involves a lot of research into the state of the law based on who your client is and what their facts are, and putting it down on paper and presenting it to a judge to try to get results. So the cornerstone of an attorney's job is communication, whether that's oral or in writing. And I think that I'm a very strong communicator. I think that's probably honestly what I can present as my strength. I think it takes patience to learn that. It is a tricky situation. Attorneys have, well, I think attorneys in a lot of media are represented as being kind of sleazy, and even at best as being wily, clever, and not necessarily honest. And I think that comes from the fact that an attorney's job is to zealously represent their client. And a lot of attorneys interpret that to mean that they are going to lie if it's necessary. And there is, I could go on for a long time about lie and truth and how that relates to being an attorney, but I don't think that's an accurate representation of all attorneys. And when a client goes in to talk to an attorney, you're talking to somebody that is a member of a profession that you might have all these preconceived notions about. When you go talk to a doctor, you're sitting in a doctor's office and it looks very doctory, and a doctor comes in a white coat and everything is set up for you to believe that this person in a white coat knows exactly what they're doing and is going to be able to help you. When you talk to an attorney, you go into an office and maybe he's sitting in a suit and it's a nice looking office, or maybe it's not. But it's harder, I think, to trust that this attorney is actually going to take the time to help you and is actually going to figure out your case and use the money that you are paying him honestly. And that might be the key difference between doctors and attorneys. Most people don't have to hand a doctor money once they get to the point that they're ready to have the doctor help them. Most people have to hand an attorney money. And that's a hard thing to have to do with somebody that you don't know and who is talking to you about things that they're educated in and you're not, who is a member of a profession that has kind of a bad name. So I think that it requires a lot of trust. And I'm going to go back to it again because I know that I'm sounding like a broken record here. But the only way to build that trust is communication. And it takes patience. I think a client has to have some patience and a willingness to trust when they come into an attorney's office in order to be able to get from point A to point B. I don't have any idea if that answered the question that you asked me, but that's the answer that I'm giving.